Hello, I'm Miranda Forsyth. I'm a professor at RegNet, the School of Regulation and Global Governance at the Australian National University.
And I'm Anthea Roberts. I'm also a professor at RegNet.
And we've both been colleagues and really best friends for a number of years now, although we both work in very different areas. So I work on violence and peace building in parts of Melanesia, so primarily in Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu. And one of the research agendas that I have that I'll talk about is on sorcery accusation related violence.
And I do nothing to do with sorcery, accusation-related violence, and I've never really been anywhere in the Pacific. But I work on global governance and international law and things like US-China competition and technology competition and economics and security. And I tend to do things in like New York and Geneva and Silicon Valley. So at first glance, it looks like we would have nothing in common to write a paper about. And yet, here we are.
Yeah, we found that actually a lot of our insights were surprisingly consistent across these wildly divergent areas that we work in. And so we thought, well, this probably suggests that there's something going on here that we should explore further.
We sort of colloquially call this our project from tribes to treaties, because Miranda tends to work at the very grassroots level with tribes in Papua New Guinea, and I tend to work at the international level at a very different scale. But we thought that if there were any insights that we were seeing appearing in both of our fields, then that was probably an important insight that moved across scales.
And so the paper that we're going to talk about today is one that's really about what is the role that human agents play in regulatory systems in order to bring about change.
So Miranda's always really focused on the human actor and particularly the relational aspect. I tend to be really focused on like innovation, like where do ideas come from and how does innovation happen and how do you like move systems through innovation. And this paper is really a product of those two different sets of ideas.
Yeah, we wanted to think, what is it about particular individuals, often known as insiders and outsiders, that enable them to both innovate and then to diffuse new ideas throughout a system? And also, how can you leverage the benefits of both insiders and outsiders to bring about change?
So I was seeing this happening in the global governance space. I was doing a sort of ethnographic or para-ethnographic approach to investment treaty regulation. And what I started to realize, connecting what I was seeing there with the innovation literature, is in the innovation literature they talk about sustaining innovations, which basically improve the status quo but keep you on the same path, versus disruptive innovations that kind of completely overthrow the status quo. And what I started to realize from watching the people that were sort of spearheading different types of innovations in global governance was that insiders and outsiders actually have very different strengths when it comes to innovation and, interestingly, then diffusion of those innovations. So the way it turned out when we started analysing it was that when it comes to innovation, so coming up with a disruptive idea that disrupts the status quo, it's actually the outsiders that typically have the advantage. And that's partly because they have very diverse ideas and experiences, so they're not sort of replicating the status quo within a field. They often have more diverse networks, and they often don't have like a vested interest in the status quo that may sort of tie them to the existing approaches. And so across many, many different fields of innovation, we see that outsiders have an advantage when it comes to innovating disruptive ideas. But interestingly, once they come up with the more disruptive ideas, they often don't have the status or the networks or the kind of capital that they need within a system to diffuse those ideas. And here we actually then see an asymmetry and a switch, which is actually the insiders that usually have the status within the field, the networks within the field, and the credibility within the field to be able to diffuse things very well. And so when it comes to sort of innovation and diffusion, because you need both of them, we have this funny asymmetry where outsiders are good at innovation, insiders are good at diffusion. And that made us start to wonder, well, could you put these together and actually have either actors or relationships that harness this insider and outsider benefit to be able to push through more disruptive innovations?
And so that's when we came up with this concept of insider-outsiders and outsider-insiders. But then I found that really confusing and kept on getting the two of them mixed up. So then we came up with different terms
which were insiders with outside eyes and outsiders with inside advantages. So what we mean by this are people individually in themselves that have some sort of a hybrid quality where they're not purely insiders or outsiders. So insiders with outside eyes are often people that are sort of have grown up within a particular community, but for some reason have more diverse experiences. So they've lived abroad, or they've been outside, or they've done something that's kind of disrupted their sort of one vision and sort of commitment to the norms of that community. And they're able to leverage that experience from the outside in terms of thinking in a new way in the inside. So they're insiders with outside eyes.
And I came across. I'll just give an example of those sort of people who I came across in the work I was doing on sorcery accusation related violence in Papua New Guinea, where really the majority of the population, like the vast majority of the population, believe in sorcery as an explanation for all kinds of misfortune, including generally ill health and death. And so when something goes wrong in a community, then people tend to ask, who is it who has caused this misfortune? And then sometimes there is retribution, sometimes very violent retribution. And so I was interested in trying to find out who are the people who actually go against that belief, who stand up and who are change agents and try to convince the community that that is not the right approach. And I found that they were very much these insiders with outside eyes, often people who had gone and who had experience outside. They'd worked in the NGO sector, for example, and then they'd gone back to their community. And because their vision of causation, if you like, had been disrupted by their experiences outside, they didn't believe so strongly in sorcery. But because they were members of that community and literally spoke the language of that community, then people were prepared to listen to them when they said, look, you really should be questioning whether or not this sorcery really is an explanation for what's been going on here. And so I found that they were very successful at disrupting these narratives in a way that just your pure outsiders who came in weren't. People said, you know what, those outsiders, they don't understand our sorcerers.
And then, so that was the first category of a hybrid individual. The second type of hybrid individual that we identified were actually outsiders that had inside advantages. And so they were often people that came from the outside, but for some reason had credibility or status or strong networks within the community, and so that they were able to leverage those. And you can get that in a variety of ways. Probably the most common way is when you're an outsider and you come and you stay for an extended period, so you develop credibility within the community or relationships within the community. And again, you found examples of that in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the people who were doing the rescues of women in particular in the Highlands who'd been accused, they were men often who had been born the children of missionaries, had grown up in Papua New Guinea, could speak the local language, knew very much about the culture and were accepted, but still had these outsider eyes and these insider advantages.
So that's what we started to think about in terms of hybrid individuals. But because Miranda's work is so much based on relationality, of course, it's not enough just to look at individuals. We also started to look at relationships. And were there ways that you could actually have relationships between insiders and outsiders to leverage these dual advantages? And that's what led us to the concept of insider-outsider network change.
Yeah, what we found, again, in my work in Papua New Guinea, was that it's very difficult trying to bring about the kind of change that's required to, stop a community from accusing individuals. People get exhausted, they are often in danger, in physical danger, and they are not sure about, what kind of laws there are. They don't have resources to print pamphlets and things like that. So those individuals, those insiders who were able to network with outsiders who could provide that moral support and also access to external resources, be that money or just information about the law, for example. Those were particularly useful people. Those were particularly useful networks in order to bring about change. And also when those insiders were able to connect with different parts of the government system, for example, with village police, with the village courts, with the district courts, with the police themselves, then they were able to be far more effective in actually bringing about interventions as well as doing advocacy.
So, of course, in saying all of this, we're not taking a normative statement about whether particular innovations are good or bad or should be diffused. That's kind of a separate question to what we're looking at. We're sort of looking at where do innovations come from and how do they diffuse, rather than whether they're good or bad. But we're also aware that there can be real problems with being an insider and outsider. And so even though we're focused often on the positives of that, we note towards the end that there can be problems. So there can be problems, for example, of capture. One of the concerns, for example, if you're moving as an insider and outsider, can be this idea of revolving doors, for example, between the private sector and the public sector in a way that can create capture and concerns about sort of cronyism and bribery and corruption in various sorts of ways, and inappropriate conflicts of interest. But also on a personal level, being an insider and outsider may be better for innovation, but it's not always better for you as an individual. And so sometimes the positive is that you're actually bridging between two communities, but sometimes the negative is that you can be falling between the cracks between the two communities, or if the communities are actually pushing up against each other, you can actually be kind of squished between the two. So this is not a normative piece about whether innovation and diffusion is good, and it's also not a normative piece to say it's always great to be an insider and outsider. Instead, it's really a piece to say, how does change happen? What is the role of insiders and outsiders in coming up with innovations and diffusing them? And can we come up with new concepts like insiders with outside eyes, or outsiders with inside advantages, or insider-outsider network change to help us conceptualize that? Now, in this particular paper, we decided to focus on Miranda's research about Papua New Guinea and sorcery. We found actually very similar patterns happening in my work in the investment treaty context in Geneva. But we didn't end up putting those in this one for a couple of different reasons. The first was we totally maxed out on the word length. The other was that I'd already published some of this with Taylor St. John on the investment treaty regime. And the third was, frankly, witches are kind of cooler than investment treaties. And so we thought that it was a more interesting combination.
Yeah, we did actually write one whole double paper that had all of Anthea's work in it as well, but we cut that out. So we hope that, that everybody reads it and enjoys it. We would really like to have any feedback as to whether or not you think that the categories that we've come up with, the theorizing that we've done, is helpful in the context of other regulatory systems.
Great, and we look forward to publishing with you guys again and talking to this community again. And this is part of a broader project we have about thinking about governance and complexity, and there are many more elements we have to come. So thank you.